Hello, this is Benjamin Boyce, and welcome to my version of the internet. Today's guest on my talk show is Belinda, who I forgot to ask if I should say her last name, so I'm just going to omit her last name. But Belinda showed up at a march or a speaking gig, or just a collection of women that were speaking at Speaker's Corner in a London park somewhere in London. And these women were speaking during International Women's Day about women's rights. And Belinda wanted to address them about her concerns about feminism. And she did so. She stood up and she said that feminism could do better with reaching out and building connections with men, because there's this huge resource of men over here that might be under the impression that feminists don't like them for some strange reason.
I hadn't planned to talk, but I asked if I could, and you very kindly allowed me to talk. And what I want to say is that I think we have a huge ally in this fight, and that we're really missing and not seeing that ally. And that ally is men. You know, it's a tiny minority of men who are doing this to us. And the vast majority of men are actually on our side. They don't like seeing men dressing up as women. They don't like seeing them going into our toilets. They feel as ashamed by it as we feel horrified. And this is a time when we all need to forget our differences and come together with men and stop slagging them off. So that's the main thing that I want to say, is that it's an ally. Men are an ally and a resource.
They need to speak up, Belinda, as well. They need to not be quite so shy as they've been up to now. They need to speak up.
But if you think about everything that I've been hearing, and it's why I came to speak, I have heard non-stop slagging off of men, not just men who want to dress up as women. I've heard non-stop, all the time I've been standing listening, we've been slagging off men. And it's time to stop doing this, because if we want them to join with us, we need to stop slagging them off and realise that they are our allies, and take some responsibility ourselves for what has happened. Because I can tell you that when I studied social anthropology, I was taught that there were no differences between men and women. I was taught this in the 1980s, and it was feminism that taught me that there were no differences between men and women, that it had all been created by culture. That is what I was taught by feminism. So we need to take responsibility for what we have done in creating this narrative, and we need to join together with men and fight this horror that is happening.
Thank you, Belinda. Thank you, Belinda. Thank you.
I felt a lot of love in her heart and a lot of pep in her spirit, and I wanted to give her a little bit more time to flesh out her ideas, and that's what we do in this interview. We talk about her stance on feminism, her stance on the relationship between men and women, and her stance, eventually we talk a little bit about her stance on transgenderism and transsexualism. In this series that I work on these interviews, there's a lot of affordance for people to kind of fish around it and wrestle with thoughts, and that's kind of actually what I want to capture. I don't want to capture the polished treatise. I want to capture the person struggling and wrestling with how to say things and what they really think about things. And this is another opportunity to do that. And I was very honored to have Belinda on, and I really think it's a real treat to have her here. So without further ado, here's Belinda. I would like to know kind of like your psychology a little bit, and not to I don't want to poke around in your brain, but I just want to understand what makes you a social conservative, like from your background and from the experiences of your life. What makes that make sense to you?
I think it's because I'm very much from a background which isn't very socially conservative. You know, I've been married a couple of times. I've had is this live, or this is outside? I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
I'll just cut in.
Oh well, yeah. I'll just anyway. So yeah.
Do you mind? Do you mind that?
No, I don't. No.
Okay.
I'll just carry on talking. So, you know, I had my had my children sort of out, I had a very unconservative route myself, shall we say, and my own parents weren't together. And so I think that I was quite drawn to, people with traditional families. That was always something that I guess I hankered after, because they had something which I didn't have and didn't really know. So
what was that? Was that like stability?
I guess so. It's funny because I don't really exactly understand myself. I mean, I've always been quite, pretty much always been quite, I don't like feminism. I'm quite strongly anti-feminist. I think feminism is a terrible thing, and I don't really know where that comes from. I have no, I often think about it. It's not as if I got on well with my dad, or don't know what sexism looks like, or anything like that, but I think there's some real problems with feminism. So I guess that when I started writing for the Conservative Woman, when I started writing for them, it was actually to do with men, because I could see what was happening to men, and I could see how it was related to feminism. And so I guess that's, I probably didn't think of myself as socially conservative until I realised that Kathy and Laura really liked my work, and I was writing for a website called The Conservative Woman, and I kind of, then I started labelling myself socially conservative. I mean, until then, I probably would never have called myself socially conservative. I'm half Danish. I'm not, So
your inroads with the thinking of yourself as conservative was having to do with rethinking the role of men in society, or rethinking the narrative that had been put out there about men, and trying to build them up in some way, or what were you trying to say about men? Or
perhaps, if you know what I'm going to go back to, in a way where it started, which is after I left university, I went to live in Poland. So this was 1991. And I studied the underground movement, the solidarity movement in Poland. Because actually it was in Poland that the first real challenge to communism started. There was 1980, the Solidarność, and so I was living in Poland, and I had my son there. And I started researching this movement, and what I learnt was that what had enabled them to challenge the communist system was the fact that they had really strong families and really strong social networks. They had this. I wrote my thesis was called "The Public Importance of the Private Sphere," and through these kind of private networks, they were able to access food and all kinds of things, and also people were really suspicious. They knew that the communist regime was a hostile regime, and what I learned from that was that actually, if you want to challenge the authority in the society, you need to have strong families, and you need to have strong private level networks. And actually, I think that was the first time, it was doing that thesis in Poland that I realised how important the family was. If you wanted to have any kind of political independence, that's what you needed to have. So when I look at our society, we're incredibly weak because as a result of the welfare state and so on, we're really dependent on the state. And I think that people have bought into the state hugely to a degree that they don't know. So I think we're much less able to challenge any, if any authoritarian regime comes along, we're much less able to challenge it than the Poles were to challenge communism. So I guess that that was where that started. And the men thing, I'm trying to think about. Yeah.
Could I ask you a question about the family and just shift the conversation to what you were bringing up about how do you build a stable family, and how does that interact with, I guess, gender roles or the reciprocal relationship of the sexes that would form a stable household in your research and then in your opinion? How do those things fit together?
I think, how do you build a stable family? I mean, I think it's, marriages, having actually taking marriage seriously, and thinking that marriage is different from cohabitation and is something that you should do and you should stick to is very important. I mean, in Poland, so that's just kind of where my model is. I mean, I think that I do believe that men and women are different, and men and women are complementary, but that doesn't mean that, in Poland, I'm not saying that women shouldn't work. In fact, very, very high levels of employment. But I think that there are differences. I don't believe that the sexes are symmetrical. I think that things start crumbling when there is an expectation that women should be working just as much as men. I don't think that really makes anyone happy. I've actually just written an article on it in the Conservative Woman. And in fact, the evidence shows that marriages are much more fragile where the man earns less than the woman. So despite all these years of feminism, there's still an expectation that sort of, to some degree, that men should bring home the bacon. And I don't think we should assume that we can just reverse gender roles. I think that there are some differences that we need to honour in some way, and I think actually I think it's quite important. I mean, I'm really for men doing childcare. That's extremely important, but I think the sexes are different, and we need to recognise that, I suppose.
So when you're considering gender roles, then it seems like there's certain sorts of expectations that feminists, broadly speaking, I think there's a lot of feminists with a lot of different viewpoints, but there's certain stereotypes about the gender roles that are that have been worked against in order, at least nominally, to grant women the freedom to make their own choices in life and not be pressured into certain roles that they don't necessarily want to do. And that's foundationally built on individual liberty. It seems like you're arguing that the expectations that have come about in the disintegration of those old stereotypes, these new stereotypes, these new expectations, have outcomes too that are just as negative, or if not even more negative.
I think that there are some really big social changes happened, which, say, for example, the pill was really important. I also think just changes in the workplace were really important, and there were. It's tricky because women have always worked, and women, and I was, I've got no problem with that. I think there's a lot of. I think women, there were changes that needed to happen, and they have happened. But there are, yes, you're right. I think there are really potentially negative things. I think that we have the situation now where there's nobody in the home, so children are kind of growing up without a concept of home and family because both parents are out at work for very long hours, and I think that is having really serious repercussions for children. If I think about the home, it's not just about childcare. It's a whole realm. There's a lot of political activity which should be happening, which just isn't happening because everyone's at work. Involvement in schools, involvement in your local government, in your neighbourhood watch or your local authority, just watching what's going on. There's a whole sort of realm of existence which I think has been really eroded because there's nobody left in the home to do those things, and I think you need to rebuild that, but you can't rebuild it while there's a constant ongoing push to get all women into the workplace, and that's what we're still living under. There is a constant, and it's seen as a problem. If there are fewer women in the workplace than men, that's seen as a problem, but women don't have the same attitude to work as men do. We don't feel we have a different approach to work. We want to work, we don't want to work as long hours. That's why there's a gender pay gap, because we have different priorities.
So in a way, to try to fix the gender pay gap would be to force women to do what they don't want to do. Maybe that might be the case.
Definitely. I mean, definitely. I mean, I find the whole concept is a bit odd, really, because is the pay gap the thing where the kind of yardstick by which we should be measuring things? I mean, maybe we could measure things by the amount of free time people have, or why measure things in terms of pay? Why?
Well, it's a very capitalist way of looking at value, human value. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know, who's happier, or who's doing the jobs they enjoy more, who's got more free time, who can spend more time with their children, who has, who. I think you might find that certainly in the past, the women who worked, before feminism really got a grip, the women who worked, either they were working they were working class women who were just had to work regardless, or where they weren't, they would be the better off, more educated women who were doing jobs that they really wanted to do and chose to do. But now everybody's just working, and I don't know how many of those people are happy at their work and doing jobs that they really want to do. They're just working because they have to. We've got to a situation where there's no choice about it. Choice is gone. Feminism has taken choice away. The myth that feminism's brought choice to women is just, I think it's quite mythical. Now how do you mean? How do you think choice has been eroded by?
Well, because in the past, if you were, say, more kind of middle class or what, if you were better off, you'd have the choice to stay at home and look after your kids. I mean, I'll give you an example. I've got two children, and they're 13 years apart in age, and when my son, the older one, was young, it was totally cool to stay at home with him till he was 3 or 4. But by the time my daughter came on the scene, women were expected to be at work by the time the child was a year old. It's not a choice of, do you want to stay at home or go into the workplace? It's like, you need to go into the workplace, because once you've got a system where each family is dependent on two incomes, then in a sense, inflation goes up for everybody. House prices go up for everybody. So everybody needs to be a two-income family in order to survive. So everything. So work is no longer a choice.
Does that have to do with feminism or economic realities of an expectation of a certain standard of living that's inspiring people to work to achieve that?
Well, I think that what happened is, first of all, you have a gradually increasing number of families where both people go to work, and I would say that kind of raises the expectation for everybody. I mean, once mortgages, I mean, it's great to have both names on a mortgage and everything like that, but when you've got two incomes paying for a mortgage, the family that's only got one income is going to be slightly wrong-footed. Do you see what I mean? Because there's just a general overall inflation. Two incomes is just, it pushes things up for everybody. It sort of floats it for everybody. So these are what you might call unintended consequences. And, you know, there might be factors other than feminism which contribute to it. And I'm not saying that, you know, of course we should, women always have worked. I've got no problem with women working. There's just a pressure that we should all be at work and all earning two incomes, and you know, yeah.
So in your cohort with the conservative women, woman, I guess,
yeah, which isn't politically conservative. It's not politically conservative.
Okay,
so
it's socially conservative. It just makes arguments that would be considered
so. Yeah.
So is that a group of? I suppose that connects you with a group of like-minded individuals, like-minded women. Do you think that those kind of that group out there, the conservative thinking women, have benefited from certain aspects of feminism about, you know, speaking your mind, about being out there, kind of?
We don't need feminism to speak our mind.
Okay.
No, not at all. Okay. No, not in the. I don't think feminism has benefited us at all. I'm also, for example, I mean, there's a group called Mothers at Home Matter. You know, for those women, and I've been involved with Mothers at Home Matter a little bit, and you know, for women who want to stay at home and look after their children, it's really difficult to do that. We've got a tax system that will severely penalises the single income family in this country. It's much worse. I've written quite a lot about it. I'm not very good at explaining things, but we do have a tax system that. Let me explain it like this: if you are a two-income family and the total income is £80,000, you're going to pay loads less tax than a single-income family where the total income is £80,000. So, you know, in fact, I've got all the statistics, you'll be really severely penalised. We have a system which severely penalises the family where one parent chooses not to work.
Okay.
So, you know, and I'm not really linked in. I mean, I write for this website. I don't, you know, I don't hang out with conservative women, you know, at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if a part of your distrust of feminism comes from just a natural distrust of movements in and of themselves. That's something that I've seen in myself and other people.
Yeah. I do think I have become increasingly aware that, you know, that Roger Scruton saying. It's a really good one, somewhere on my shelf, where he says, you know, it takes hundreds of years to build something up and you can smash it down really quickly. So, yes, I do have a sort of inherent suspicion of any kind of social movement. And likewise, I would be very suspicious of any movement which tried to take things back to, I wouldn't like to see some forced tradition either, because I think...
Okay.
You know, I think you're right. I think any kind of movement tends quite often to be about a minority steering things from majority, and I am. Yeah, you're quite right. I have an inherent suspicion of social movements, but that I've only recently realised that I do have that.
Well, with that in mind, what set the Poland or the Polish solidarity movement apart from that? I'm assuming that you were for the solidarity movement.
Oh,
what
very
was
much
something
so.
different about that? How was it organized? What was its ends?
I mean, that's really interesting, because actually it was such a mass movement. I mean, within 1 week, there were 10 million people on a sit-down strike throughout the whole country within a week. So it really was, this was not something by a small number. This was the whole country saying, no, we're annoyed with this. We don't like communism. And you know, so that, you know, it's true. I'm very much in favour of what happened there, and there was a big build up to that. And I would say that the thing that marked that out is it was genuinely very democratic in its origins. It was a genuine mass movement, not steered by the media. It was people individually coming together and saying, we've had enough. So I guess that would be, and they were challenging a authoritarian imposed regime that was not part of their history or their country. It was just an alien power. So, I think you've got to challenge any kind of oppression. So I'm contradicting myself there, but for sure, if somebody's, if there's some alien power or force oppressing you, you do have to fight it. And
well, that is a good point. Let's look into that a little bit. So, insofar as feminism is fighting for the freedom from oppression, specifically for women, you don't have a problem with it?
I do, because I don't believe who are these oppressors of women? Who are women being oppressed
rapists,
by?
Let's just say rapists, misogyny, societal expectations that think of women as sex objects, that think of women as inferior. This is what the feminists that I've had on.
You know what's really interesting? It's so I'm in my 50s, and everything has got so much worse since I was a kid. The sexism and the objectification and all this stuff. I mean, I hear about behaviours that just didn't exist when I was young. And this has happened under feminism. And I think for me, the problem of feminism, I would have been absolutely fine with a movement to say, hey, there are only a tiny number of women at universities. Why is this? Let's sort this out. Anything where you see some gross inequality, you've got to sort it out. We haven't got the vote. Let's sort it out. I'm absolutely up for that. But what feminists did was they said, why has this happened to us? Oh, it's because men have been oppressing us. And for me, that is the really big lie which creates the whole problem, because if you want to understand why women are in the position that they were in, you need to understand about our biology and how it affected our lives. And I think that, you had in the 1960s, the pill was invented and women had control over their fertility. And I think that they completely lost sight of how a world felt where you could just get pregnant, you could just get pregnant and there's, you've got your baby and you're really dependent, and that's no man oppressing you. That's just the way, that's your biology, and that's just how it works. And I think that if you appreciate the effect of how we are built, our biology, our nature, we give birth, we get really attached to our children. You have to dehumanize yourself to go out to work when your child is a small baby. I did research on this. It's really tough, and most women, their whole priority changes when they've had a baby. But I think that what the feminists said was, they traced the source of oppression to men, but actually, if you look at it, we had a system, what you call patriarchy. We had a system in place which ensured that men supported us overall when in a sort of quite vulnerable situation. When you give birth, when you've got your small baby, you need support. So we had this, what you might call patriarchy. Men were encouraged to stay with their families. I mean, a man walking off and leaving his wife, that would have been a great source of shame before feminism. But now men can just walk away from their families and not think twice about it. They really can. But so we created marriages where the pressure was on men to stay with their families. The pressure was on men to support their families. And if you look, if you actually study back in history, feminists have this big thing about women are always the ones who've done the hard work. I mean, this is absolute nonsense. I've got a book up there. It's really good. It's called, sorry, I like privileged sex. But if you look at it, actually, men are the ones who've been the beasts of burden throughout history. We were not so crazy to join the workplace until the working conditions enormously improved. You know, that was when, so if the way I see patriarchy as a system which was created to ensure that men, you know, looked after women. And what feminists have been doing is, you know, we've been, as we've been destroying all of those social structures, the people who can wander off are the men. Men are much freer to go. Everything is sort of freed up, and you know, the people who suffer now are quite often you know, women of my age who may have hung around with their husband all their life, and then he goes off and leaves them for a younger person, and they're a little bit, you know, they're a bit stuck. And previously it would be a lot more difficult for that to happen. And the other thing I'd like to say is, you know, I'm not saying that oppression didn't happen, and I think that, I mean, there are two things, you know, it depends, you know, there are different parts of society, and I also think men and women have got two very different kinds of power. I don't think one has more power than the other, but they're very different kinds of power. And of course, there will have been situations, you know, there's the expression, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Of course, there will have been situations where women were left really in a desperate situation. But I think that what we've got now, power corrupts absolutely. To be perfectly honest, I think we've got many more absolutely hideous situations where mothers are just forcing fathers out of families, you know, or you know, male domestic abuse, or the numbers of homeless men. So, you know, women have got the power now, although feminists will never admit it, but we've got, you know, and the other thing to remember is, if you think about which arena of life is most important, you know, if we're all honest with ourselves, what really counts is what goes on in our private lives. It's our whole domestic arena. It's not out there in the bloody workplace. What is of value, what moves you, is the private realm. You know, it's your friends, it's your family. And this is the arena where women have always had power, and there's a real denial about that. I mean, the power that women have because their procreative power, you know, that they give birth, that's always been a tremendous resource, and women are exploiting and abusing this really badly in this country. You know, we've got these closed family courts, and we've got, you know, there are so many men, you know, the rates of male suicide we have, you know, men are committing suicide, I'm sad, you know, on a fairly regular basis, because they've just been completely excluded from their child's life. And you don't have to be, the system we have, how it is here is that if you say that you've experienced domestic abuse, you can get legal aid. And ever since they introduced this law where if you say you've suffered domestic abuse, you can get legal aid, the number of women who can claim domestic abuse has just really gone up. And because it's a way to get legal aid to then divorce their husbands and, you know, get funding and all the rest of it. And you know, and we had in 1989, we had the father, it's actually written in law that the father is no longer the legal guardian of his child. You know, this is, what's her name? Sorry, but this is written in our law. The father is no longer, from 1989, the father is no longer the legal guardian of his child. I mean, this
before
is
then, was it shared, or was it exclusively the man?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it was shared. I have have read about this. It's a really complicated. If you look back in about the 19th century, I think there were, I have looked into this, but I would need to look at it a bit more. I've looked into it and come to the conclusion that women actually had it all right. I mean, I know that early on it was the man who had, I know. When, I'll tell you what, I think that what I found was that when men had exclusive rights to their children, they hardly ever excluded the mother from the child. So this kind of situation didn't happen. But once women got the power, you got many more women excluding men than you'd ever had men excluding women. How it was in the 20th century is more complicated, and I'd have to look into it. But I don't think that there was a situation where you had men regularly excluding women mothers from their children. That didn't happen. So whatever situation we had, we didn't have that. And now we have a situation where women are regularly excluding men.
So since the 60s, since the invention and the implementation of the pill, there's been a sea change in the dynamics between males and females. And it seems like we haven't really thought through the entire implications. Perhaps we're living through those implications, but we haven't really thought through those. So I wonder if in part of your project, whether you think of it as a singular project or not, is to refine the role of men and the relationship between males and females in the society, post-pill, post-feminism, and rethinking that. And I wonder if you're trying to move towards a place where both sides, both men and women, can get a clearer picture of the state that we found ourselves in at this point.
I think that would be a really great thing to do, but in order to do it, we really need to get out of our heads that men have been oppressing us, and that was why I stood up at that Speaker's Corner thing, because I don't know if you listened to all the talks, but it was one talk after another. And actually, right at the very beginning, I don't know if it was recorded, but the woman who was the kind of, who sort of set it up, she said at the beginning, one thing we all have in common is that, men hold all the power. She made a statement right at the beginning. So, and this is, we've got to realize men are not our oppressors and they're not our enemies. And, let's work towards a new society, not new society, but renegotiate relationships between the sexes. Let's do that. There have been enormous changes. Let's renegotiate those relationships, but we can't do it while we're seeing men as our oppressors. That's just like this lie that is getting in the way of a sort of genuine, healthy renegotiation. I think we need to understand that men and women are different and talk to each other. And I'll give you an example. It was one of those talks, and this great woman, stood up and spoke, and she'd been a bus driver, and she recounted about how, as a bus driver, how awful it had been to get her period and have to, change her sanitary products, and they had no toilets, they had no breaks for bus drivers, and how awful it had all been. And I'm absolutely sure, I have no doubts that it had been awful. But what I suspect is that once you tell men, look, this is a really serious problem for me. This is, we have this issue. Can you change something? Can you do something so that I too can go into work and have my period and still... Actually, the change will happen. It's not that men were, we don't care about you, we're not going to pay any attention. It's just they hadn't thought things through. They didn't know. They just didn't have it all. You've got to tell them. It's like a relationship between, a husband and wife or whatever. Quite often, it's not that one is trying to oppress the other. It's there's been a lack of communication or all kinds of assumptions going on, and one person just really didn't know or really didn't understand something. And I think that's the same with men and women. Men aren't trying to oppress us. And I do think, sometimes I do think it seems like things have got worse, but then I just, as someone who has seen, we've had decades now of saying that men are abusers and harassers and all this stuff. And quite honestly, I feel like men don't love and respect women. I mean, it's quite possible, should I say, that men don't love and respect women in the way they might have done 40 years ago, where I think there was a more, I think we've actually sort of damaged the relationship between the sexes. So
by alienating men,
by
making men feel like they're the bad guys.
Exactly.
They're born wrong.
That's right. It's interesting. I didn't know how different men were until I had my son. I think that's something. I think men know that women are a different species. I don't know. That's the impression I get. Men know that women are different for them. But women have this tendency to think that men are just like them. They're sort of like defective women. And if a man doesn't do something in the way that you do it, we kind of think, well, there's something wrong with him because this is how I would have done it and he's not done it like that, so he's at fault. Instead, we need to really understand this is a man, he's different, he thinks differently, he sees the world differently, and when he does things in that way, it's not because he's defective, he's just got a whole different way of understanding things, and maybe we should try and understand that. And so it was really quite a revelation for me having a boy and seeing this being is a bit different from me, in some kind of fundamental way. And I think that's a really valuable thing that we should be teaching our daughters. We should be teaching them that, men are different, in all these ways. Actually, I was just talking to somebody phoned me up the other day, and she was talking about, like men being visual and just being aware that, for example, I'm probably treading on risky territory, but when you're really young, if you've got the benefits of a wonderful cleavage and great legs and you flaunt it, it is going to get men, I think women think, well, I could see, but I wouldn't have a reaction. So why is that man having that reaction? But men are much more visually stimulated than women are, for example, and maybe it's just worth bearing in mind before you go out. You might tell your teenage daughter before she goes out, look, bear in mind that men do get quite, I don't know what the word is, provoked,
aroused
when you dress like that. Bear that in mind. But that would be, that would be in feminist terms, that would be called
what is that? Victim blaming.
Victim blaming, but it's not victim blaming, it's just understanding that we're different and respecting it.
Well, at the same time, there can be, I'm not saying in every case there is, but there's a slight disingenuousness about that, because that's ignoring the power that a woman has over the man, or just pretending that the woman has no power over a man, that the man's reaction to the woman's beauty is all his fault and has nothing to do with how the woman presents herself, which is
exactly,
it's just not true.
Exactly, it's not true. That's exactly what I'm saying. I think we're on the same page. That's what I'm saying. As women, this is a real power. I mean, I think as a young woman, I was very aware of this power, and there's a denial about it. We have this, and we do have this kind of power, and why not just acknowledge it, and I don't know. I think, yes, it'd be great. Renegotiate the relationships, but let's just get rid of all this stuff about men being our oppressors and patriarchy and yeah.
Well, when you use the word renegotiate earlier, renegotiating these relationships on a societal level, on a narrative level, on just how we think about the roles, it might be the case that in a certain respect, the woman, the suffering woman, or the woman that's oppressed by patriarchy, the systemic patriarchy, is the big ask. It's not necessarily what they want, right? In negotiation terms, you're supposed to ask for much more than you actually want in order to get what you want.
Yeah,
but that might be a tact that was beneficial at a certain point,
I have,
but needs to go away.
Yeah, Benjamin, I have thought of that actually, because, one of my arguments is, well, we could have got the things we needed just through liberal democracy, just by, through normal democratic processes. And I do appreciate that sometimes when you want to bring about change, you need to go a bit bigger. You need to push, like you say, a big ask. You need to push a bit further than you necessarily need to, in some sense, if you know what I mean, that you have to put on this show. But I just think that there is an element of that. But I just think in the case of feminism, it's it's gone way over and above and beyond. And, I think what's happened is just, women just genuinely, repeatedly believe that men are oppressing them. And it's just, sure, perhaps there'd have been room for saying, there might have been room for some kind of smaller social movement, but somehow there are a number of kind of foundational myths. There's been a real denial of the fact that men and women are different, and the whole transgender thing has bought in and is exploiting that. That was created by feminism, denial that men and women are different. There's this whole idea that men have been oppressing us since the beginning of time, and women have bought into that massively. And I just think if something is a lie, it's not good. This is really a big problem, and it is extraordinary just to hear women talk. If it was any other group, if you just put any other group in the place of the word man, you'd say it was anti-Semitic, or it was racist, or it was disablest. But because it's men, we can say what we like. It's like we've completely forgotten men are completely equal human beings to ourselves. That we've lost a sense of that. Why there are like these group that we just talk about as if they were lower than us. I mean, if you just do that, if you try and substitute, it's a lie. There's this ideology that masses of people genuinely believe, and young people growing up, and that men, about patriarchy and men, and just think of the harm that does to relationships between men and women. And also, I actually think another thing that I think is really interesting is the differences, like real masculinity, the sense of what men are. We're always pushing men to be like ourselves, and I feel that we're actually losing masculinity from society. I think for us women, it's, I would like to sometimes take men as a role model for, there are certain male characteristics which I think are a tremendous benefit to myself as a woman, but men are not even allowed to manifest those characteristics because it would be perceived as toxic. Well, I think that men are. There's the competitive thing, but there's also, for example, I think men are really good at. They can kind of go head to head and argue and fall out and just be friends to get, all that arguing stuff, and then they can just be friends again afterwards. Like that argument doesn't mean that they become enemies, and I think that is a really sort of valuable asset of men. What other characteristics might there be of masculinity?
Risk-taking behavior.
Yeah, there's risk-taking behavior.
To a certain degree, maybe.
To a certain degree, I think, and I just think generally, I just feel like men don't pussyfoot around each other so much. I kind of get this feeling. I mean, it is difficult for me because I've been out of the workplace, and when I was working, I tended to work in, sort of in academia, which is quite isolating. But, so you're not interacting so much. But I just feel like you don't have to be so sensitive around men, and you can just say stuff. I'm not sure. I just feel like they're different, and I want to find out. I want to find out what it is, and I want to learn from it. And I think we all should, instead of all the time we're trying to say we've got this female model in our head, and anything we want to make men like us, and anything which isn't like us is toxic. So I don't know what those ways are, but I'd like to learn them, I guess, out of interest,
May I push back against you in good faith about a couple of statements that you said in the thing? One thing that you said, and I don't know what the total context is, but you said that there was something, I'm misquoting you, but there's something horrific about men dressing like women. Is that really offensive to you? That
not
men...
at all.
Okay.
Do you know what? Not at all. I've got no problem about men dressing as women. It was like a shorthand for do you know what? I'd been there. I didn't have a slot to talk. They very kindly gave me a slot to speak, and really all I wanted to say, what is horrific? That was like, I really don't mind men dressing as women, and I'm sorry I said that, and I don't mind women dressing as men. Absolutely no issue with that at all. I think what I do regard as just like, for me, it's the whole what's happening to, the sex change thing, and especially young people, people having mastectomies, young people taking hormones, either, what's it called? They take different stages of hormone treatment. For me, that's I'm afraid it's mutilation. It's mutilating your body, and also there is a real issue of I do think we need women-only spaces and men-only spaces. I do find the confusing, suddenly saying, if a man can say he's a woman and a woman can say no, I'm sorry, if you're born with a penis, you're a man. If you're born with a vagina, you're a woman. And you can be a man, and you can, if you want to dress up or you want to be totally feminine, please go ahead, but don't make me pretend that you're a woman, because I just see you as that's for me lying. So I'm sorry I said that, and I have had, I don't mind men dressing up as women.
Okay. Good. I mean, not good on you. I don't mean that derogatorily. I wanted to give you an opportunity to clarify that, because I've been in this series. I've been speaking with a lot of people who are transgender, who are detransitioned, and who are women, who are men, who are feminists, who are. I haven't had too many men's rights advocates on. I guess you're one of the premier ones, and Logan McCree. So there's a lot of different nuance in that conversation that gets collapsed when you're on your soapbox and you have to say your thing and you have a few sentences to say. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to expand a little bit on that.
Thank you for giving me that opportunity, because I'd be upset to feel that I have a problem with that, because I don't.
So you said you're working on a bigger project. Is there a book in the works? Are you mapping out some sort of a systematic thought?
Well, I'm actually starting to, I'm kind of treading into a new area. I'm supposed to be working on, I'm kind of on the LGBT stuff. And I actually want to, but I'm finding it really difficult. So for the past few years, I've been writing about men's issues and feminism. And now, because of the sex education, I want to push back against that, and I've kind of want to write a short book about it, but I am very, very behind doing so. And actually, I wanted to look at interestingly, I kind of wanted to look at the LGB, the lesbian, gay, bi side of things a little bit more, but I find that really difficult, because I'm quite, I've got gay friends. I go to a church where, anyway, it doesn't, it's really, doing the LGB topic is really difficult, because I don't want people to think I'm homophobic, and I don't want to be homophobic, and I'm not homophobic. But if you look at, I've done quite a lot of reading at the agenda. It's in academia. You know, what lies behind the whole LGBT movement, and there's this massive desire to get rid of heteronormativity. Smash heteronormativity was how Ellie Barnes put it. Smash heteronormativity. There's this whole discourse, you know, just as feminism wanted to smash the patriarchy, the LGBT movement wants to smash heteronormativity, and they want to make it so that, you know, you choose to be gay, you know, today I've got a girlfriend and tomorrow I'll have a boyfriend, and I actually think that human sexuality is, I think it's got, well, I might be speaking as a woman, because for women, I think, are much more fluid in their sexuality than men are. So that might be informing my concept. But I think that actually, that there are elements, you know, that heterosexuality is to some extent socially and culturally created. You know, some of it is innate and some of it is socially and culturally created. And if we abandon all those systems, we will really seriously erode heterosexuality, and people, there will be, as Peter Tatchell quite explicitly wants, we will have a great deal more, you know, gay and lesbian relationships. And I can imagine, you know, in a generation or two, it's like, you know, you could say, oh, I don't have any grandchildren because my, you know, and I'm kind of seeing things as a mother and as an older woman. You kind of want to see generations reproducing, and it's not just for the future of our society, it's because that gives so much structure to a person's life. It gives you focus, and I wouldn't want young people who could choose to marry the opposite sex and have a family. I feel it would be a shame if the person who had the potential to do that actually chose to be gay. And it's interesting because I tweeted something and somebody tweeted back and said, well, did you choose to be heterosexual? And I thought about it, and and I remember as a teenager there was an older woman who came on to me, and actually I rejected it, and I thought, ooh, that's really weird, and my choice was to reject it, and I'm really glad I did, because I'm heterosexual and I've had my family, and I think, well, had that situation happened today, I might not have rejected it, because it would have just seemed so much more, this is the cool thing to do, let's be gay. Okay. And so and I think that honestly, people, I just think we need to look ahead a little bit. I don't want to be, I don't know, does what I say make any sense?
I can, there's a lot of landmines. Right.
Yes, I know. That's why I hate this topic. And to be honest, I'm really surprised that I'm even talking about it, because I find the topic quite terrifying. Well,
there's a lot of capacity for blowback and for people coming down pretty hard, even on me for even listening to you, right? Because it's such a protected topic. There's a way of approaching your ideas and presenting your ideas where you don't even have to be against any individual or even necessarily any class of person. You can focus on the ideas such as queer theory, which plenty of homosexual individuals are against queer theory. Like Douglas Murray takes it to task, and at least in his most recent book, he's a conservative British gay man. So there's ways of going about, and actually, in fact, if you reach out and start to speak with members of that community, you will find a lot of people with a lot of conservative views.
Exactly, and to be perfectly honest, this is what I really want to do, and that was how I got on to Logan McCree, because I'm interested in doing this, and there's another guy, Alex Neora, who also has, he's also got very, very similar views, and I've also, I go to a church where I've spoken to my priest about it, because he's gay. I know a lot of gay people, and so this is something that I really want to do, and I think it's a really good point, because I really don't want to I don't want to alienate gay people, and I do. It is the ideology I have a problem with. I don't have a problem with people and what they want to do, but it's in the context of what we're teaching our children here in the UK. You know, there is an agenda. I've read it, I've researched it. There is a very specific agenda which lies behind everything, and when you present it, it looks cool, but you know, when you see what when you know what they're trying to do, it's not so cool. And I think you're right. I think there are lots of gay people, and actually, funnily enough, you say that, because that was exactly what I stood up and said at a talk recently. I said the people we really need to be talking to are the gay people, because a lot of them will be on our side, and you know, they'll be talking from a much more informed perspective, and so, you know, there's also there's that drag queen, Kitty Demure. I don't know if you know her, okay. Kitty Demure. She speaks out against drag queens in, you know, drag queen story time, and you know, and in a way it's a bit like, I mean, you're right. There are a lot of landmines, and that's why I feel, you know, it's funny because with feminism it's easy. I'm a woman and I can say what I like because I'm a woman, you know, but when it gets to the whole LGBT, it's like, I'm not gay, so it's like, what right have I got to say anything, you know? So in a way, that's why I'm supposed to be, I have actually told someone that I'm going to be writing something, but I've really been struggling with it, you know, because you don't want, you know, I don't want to, homophobia is a terrible thing. The interesting thing is that actually I think that the really big push which is happening in society at the moment is actually having a negative feedback. You know, I think that there is a risk of actually possibly increasing homophobia because it's just so full on at the moment, in the same way that feminism has kind of, you know, actually stirred up more problems. You know, it's stirred up hostility from men. So I don't know.
It continually goes back for me to how much the activists are screwing up everything they're trying to fight for. Just like I just see that over and over again. Like there's an attitude that infects different political activist communities that actually goes overboard and actually poisons the well a bit. And I've been trying to practice what I preach by reaching out with individuals across a variety. I can do a lot better than I'm doing, but across the variety of political spectrums, within different categories of classes, and making inroads with that, and hearing the people who aren't poisoning the well, who are actually doing good work, and understand that there's a proportion in how far to interact with people and how to bring people on your side rather than demonize them and use all these words like sexist, racist, phobe, this, phobe, that.
I think is it the LGB Alliance? You know, like there's the group that's broken away from Stonewall. I mean, I think they would be a really promising group to go and speak to and talk to and say, look, you know, how do you feel about this? I think it would be great to actually hook up with people like that, you know, and voice anxieties and see where they are, you know, because I think that, I mean, it's people like that are great. Stonewall, you know, they did good work in the past, but now they've just gone into overdrive, and I think they're doing masses of damage. So
it seems like your concern is very very heartfelt, but also very important, and I think that if given the opportunity for you to refine that and lay it out there, what you're actually working towards would eclipse the reaction that you get from people seeing you just being against something. Like that little clip stirred up a lot of, I think, could be inching the conversation towards a better place just by allowing people to criticize feminism in order for feminism to reform itself, without necessarily losing its core principles and what it wants to achieve, but also just looking honestly at what has it achieved, what is it achieving, does it want everything that it's affecting in the world, and somebody with you, with conservative views, with socially conservative views, there's an expectation, or it's really tricky for conservatives to not be seen and silenced as reactionary. And the way that I see to kind of thread through that needle is to present solidly the positive, what you're working for, which would be family and the procession of generations and like the balance of the sexes and the healthy relationship between men and women.
That is exactly, you've put it so much better but that is exactly what I feel. It's like I like heterosexuality, or something like that. I want to stand up and defend this thing which has made my life good. But I don't want to knock. Yeah, you've put it much better. I'm going to shut my mouth and not dig myself into a hole. Because you've put it so much better than I have. Because I feel like that. I want to be standing up for something positive. I don't want to be knocking people back. And also, I think it is very easy as someone who's straight to really lose sight of what gay people have had to put up with and real pain that they've had. And I think there is a real risk of losing the ground that they have gained. And anyway, you put it much better.
I want to deflect the praise by just saying that, like, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, I wanted to give you a chance to actually expound on your ideas, because I could feel real strong love for something, like for men and for women and the relationship between men and women. And that tiny little speech that you gave, which was less than 2 minutes long, it was very, very short. I could feel that. I wanted to give that more air.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, I think that's probably my strongest motivating factor in my sort of battle against feminism, really, is the potential for love between men and women, and what we've been missing out on all those years. And it's also, I think, it's a really exciting challenge where, like, we are actually like, and I'm not saying they're not men who are like women and women who, sure they are, but on averages, we are actually two very different types of being, and building a relationship is really exciting, because you, as a woman, you grow when you build a relationship with a man. You discover masculine aspects about yourself, and I'll give you a practical example of this. Okay, so if you look at psychology's been really influenced by what women like to do, talking therapy. Women like to talk and they talk out their problems, but that's become the main form of therapy for men and women. But if you look at the male form of therapy, men they really benefit from taking action. If a man has undergone some kind of tragedy, like, I think they write a piece of music or whatever thing it is that they're good at, or build a shed. Doing something practical is what helps a man to heal. Men have a different healing process. But if you look at that male healing process and you say, this is how men heal, and you present it to women, well, there are an awful lot of women who would really learn and benefit from that male way of doing things. So I see masculinity as a resource which is there not just for men, but for women as well. And at the moment, we're like shutting it down, it's toxic, push it away, hide it, get rid of it. And so that's what we need to develop and allow. And it's like, I do just sort of really, that sort of love between men and women. That's what we should be working on and building. So I think that that's kind of the thing that's upset me most when I look at feminism is, you know, and I think about these young people growing up, and I also just think, you know, for me myself, I mean, I've been imperfect in my, of course I have, you know, I mean, I've misunderstood men, and it's just, you know, sometimes just understanding that how peculiar they are is kind of helpful. They're not flawed females, they're just odd human beings.
I can't disagree with that, being a particularly odd specimen of the male human experiment. Well, thank you so much, Belinda, for this chance, this opportunity to hear your thoughts and to have you on. And there's a lot of people that are going to agree with you on my channel, a lot of people that are going to disagree with you on Twitter and also on my channel. And but I hope that this does a little bit more to forward the conversation on this topic.
Yeah, I try not to read Twitter too much. I try not to read comments so that I don't get, you know, but you know, thank you very much for giving me a chance to develop and think about my views. It's really lovely having somebody asking me what I think, and it helps me to work out what it is I think, and so I do appreciate that.
Congratulations for reaching the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed this product, consider donating to this channel via paypal.me/Benjamin Boyce or joining me on Patreon. Also follow me on Twitter at Benjamin A. Boyce. Have a good night.